Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of At Sree Show. I'm Srenivasan, and we're talking with David Beard today. David is one of the most helpful, generous people on the internet, and that's saying something. David is the executive editor of PRI, Public Radio International, and he's calling in today from Boston. Hi, David.
Hello, Sree.
He is at DaBeard, DaBeard, DaBeard on Twitter. And it's partly because of his Twitter feed that we're talking today, because every time you go on his Twitter feed, you will learn something. And he's going to share his tips on how to use Twitter and social media in better ways. We're going to start, David, by just having you tell us a little bit about your work and what exactly the executive editor does at PRI.
The executive editor here, its position didn't exist before, is somebody who looks to tell stories across different platforms, the right way for the right people at whatever time they want us. And we the company began as primarily a producer of radio shows. Garrison Keillor was its first show, and other shows have passed through this American life, and now there are our shows. One of the longest running shows is The World, PRI's The World, which looks at the entire globe from a different perspective, and we also have John Hockenberry's The Takeaway, or Kurt Anderson's Studio 360, or Science Friday, Tavis Smiley. These are a few of the radio shows, and I thought at one level we've had a generation of great thinkers who haven't really shown up on a Google search term because it didn't search audio the way that it does for text. And I started thinking, what if we took those stories? What if we did more than radio scripts? What if we wrote them with a specific angle for a hunter-gatherer in a digital world, or to answer a specific question? We'd have one level of coverage that we didn't have before. And then what if we just looked at what we wanted to answer right away, almost as a ventriloquist, for the voice of these radio shows if they were transplanted on the internet, and we were creating another hour or two of programming. What would it be? What would it be for a podcast? What would it be for a story subject matter, and the way to tell a story? So I'll wrap up by saying I think if you were to kind of define what we do, and it's to a very majority under 35 audience digitally, it's telling, sort of looking for the wheat instead of the chaff out there. We might not follow the crowd for 50 stories that might be tragedy porn, perhaps, but we might look at ways to solve problems, and at ways to where we can learn from other countries and other procedures, so that our listenership, our readership, our viewership can have a better experience, that they wouldn't waste their time. That's kind of what I do each day, is hunt and look for these things.
What a great way to define what you do. I was in a meeting earlier today where I was giving your example of trying to be helpful in the media world, trying to learn in the media world. Way too many news organizations are telling people what's going on, not thinking about solutions. And yours isn't a feed that does just that. The other thing I'll just mention to everybody is that you did these name checks of these kind of legendary radio brands, Garrison Keillor and all these other folks, big names in media who are alive and well on radio, but some of our international folks may not know them as well. So I just wanted to make sure that they understand that these are kind of prime brands in the audio space and in the media space, and they're doing so well in this new world. But let's talk about that. Your journey has been through legacy media organizations, when those were all the places that we all wanted to work. And nowadays we live in a BuzzFeed world, and you have shown that there is serious, intelligent, fun work to be done in this new media landscape. So please talk a little bit about that. And in a way, I want to come later to this idea that we live in another golden age of radio. We just don't call it radio, it's audio in so many ways, and people love audio. Why is that? So let's talk first about your journey through these legacy media organizations.
Right. I think that that learning about the future and learning about leadership is often looking at who led you before and how things worked or didn't work before, and sort of resolving to do the opposite if you ever had a chance to have some influence. So I saw a lot of ego, a lot of conflicting duchies, a lot of fights for sort of zero sum game when you're in a legacy world that's declining. Everybody's worried about their jobs, and everybody's worried about their influence. What I didn't find as much was our folks thinking about the user, our folks thinking about the reader. I think that some of the most pitched battles were sort of intramural inside of a newsroom, and not over what's the best way to tell that story for the reader or the listener or the viewer. And so I've tried lowering the ego threshold, building the collaboration, and moving towards something that would feel like solutions or like possibilities. I worked at before coming here at the Washington Post, and we created newsletters such as one called The Optimist that basically gave people. It still exists now. 8 or 10 reasons a week on stories that may not have made the front page of the website or the newspaper, but were significant or could represent something big for the future. They weren't just feel-good stories, but they were stories of ambition as well. And I think that in this job we're able to do that with a number of with many times the bulk of our coverage. When we might find ourselves ahead of others on issues about women's soccer or gender equity around the world, or the experience of first and second generation immigrants to a country, or the experiences of folks who are under 30 or 35 in a society. And so we're looking at a next audience or a new audience, but also we're not trying to reach everybody. We're trying to reach people whose worlds are still expanding, and so you could be 80 and be that way, or you could be 23 or 24. So it seems to be working for us. That's sort of so a change, I guess, would be moving from a very structured top-down system to a flatter, collaborative team system. In fact, when I hire people, I'll usually say, I've now entrusted this business to you. I'm the transitory figure. I'm the person here until it's your thing. Likewise, I feel like I'm the good steward for the material that's put out by this website or the stories that we create digitally for the next audience. Guidelines and hopes and reflective of what they're looking for, but not cloying. There are other people who focus on young readers, but they have more stories about the Kardashians or more stories about sex and marijuana than we might necessarily. We might have I'm deeply concerned about how you, if you were, or your son or grandson, will exist in a world with greater robotics, will exist in a world with a burden to pay on this large group of people who are aging, and you'll be putting in for some sort of pension or be doing all the work that more people used to do when people's in their 20s and 30s in some countries, say the U.S., Italy, Japan, Spain, made up a bigger share of the population than it does now.
This is just so interesting, and for the folks who don't know you personally, know that you're not just saying all this as corporate speak. This is how you live your life. You're kind of this optimistic, friendly person, and it's so refreshing in a world where I remember talking to you at the kind of height of the media panic, and you always saw things as that journalism has a place in our society, will always be around the way I believe, and you're bullish on media and journalism. How did you uh, get to that point in your life? Because it's fair to say people who are your colleagues, our contemporaries, aren't all like that.
I think I just I realized that we are moving to a world that doesn't have paper boys. It doesn't have marketing agents. It doesn't have vast sums um, to attract readers. That you had to be more focused on who you're interacting with than ever before. I, in some ways, retreated to a day when I worked on a small town paper and everybody knew the best place in town for X or Y, and storytelling, I believe, is almost like you or someone in your family would tell a story to somebody over the dining room table. It's got to be sort of to the point and hold their attention, or you'll be drowned out by your a story by a younger cousin. And so I think that it actually goes to back to the root of storytelling and trying not to. I think there was an imprimatur when somebody had the only news radio station in town, or had the only newspaper nearby, or had the only one that had the, say, political views of your father or mother. That there was a bit of a monopoly, but now people can get news everywhere. So it's a humbling experience as you center in on telling something that might be interesting, and reaching out and adding to this living document of a story sometimes as well. Most of, if I could take a quick detour, most of today and yesterday have been more in the service industry than in sort of investigative journalism. We are investigating, but we're investigating which charities do the best job of providing services for the hordes of people fleeing Syria and Afghanistan for Europe and other countries. So that as this story grows, we could become a trusted source using Charity Navigator or other tools where we could say, you, dear reader, if you're going to donate, this is, we've checked it out. This is probably not the last press release that crossed our desk. This was something that is doing good work. And here are a few smaller places that you might not have considered that are better positioned at the moment in these places as well. So if you ask me what I'm thinking about today, about 80% of it is how can I serve that question in people's minds. In Canada at this moment, the biggest search term for refugees is, how can I sponsor a Syrian refugee? That's the biggest Google search query right now, with the word refugee in it.
You can imagine that in some countries in Europe, it's like how to lock out refugees, right? So different people come at it different ways. This is, I think, the way you're approaching it is different from most journalists I know. And there was, to be fair, also this idea that our job is not to help. Our job is to just talk about these things. So you've taken a different approach, and in fact, service journalism has had among certain journalism circles a kind of, the people have had some disdain for it, right? Like though that's a service journalism thing, you're elevating it to something really worthwhile, really serious, and in keeping the spirit of journalism, and saying we have some kind of obligation to be helpful and not just pointing to problems all day long.
Right. We have more information now than we ever had. And that leads to a certain type of paralysis. You're ingesting and ingesting from the fire hose all day long. But you can't say, is this story better than that story? If I were to act, what do I do? So in some ways, we're both better informed and worse informed than we've been in decades. And I might just skip. I don't have to be the newspaper of record or the site of record. I can skip certain stories that others might cover, and say, I don't think I can make a difference there. I think there's already a cacophony of 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 voices there. I think it's well covered, but here's a different way of looking at it, and I in some ways want to show both. Um, I don't know. I guess the way that I think about what the radio does, what we do, what others, the Monitor or in the U.S. Christian Science Monitor or the Global Post or some other places, they're filled with people from, say, here in the United States for the time being, where we're talking, who care about that is the rest of the world, and want other people to care about there. And so, or want others, folks from abroad, to kind of explain this crazy country where we are living right now. Like, what does it mean? We can look at something like Trump, but we might look at it in a different way. The number of new Mexican folk songs about Trump, for example, or the other different kinds of angles. So I really enjoy that. And I think that as for younger audiences, if I could just speak to America, it's the most diverse, most internationally interconnected generation ever until the next generation. And so I have to prepare those folks to be good consumers and good leaders and full participants as much as they could be. At least the material is there to have a better life. And so it doesn't lean one way or the other necessarily politically with any pattern, but it does offer resources on both sides if somebody wants to go to a meeting or get involved in some way.
We're going to take a break here, but when we come back, David's going to share with us some of his best tips for using social and being better and smarter on social media. You're listening to my conversation with David Beard, who's at DaBeard, DaBeard on Twitter, and he is with PRI, Public Radio International. And please check out our wonderful archives of the At Sree show on the Play It Network. We'll be right back.
Sree, thank you very much.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you. We're clear. Just want to give about 10 seconds of silence so they can find this break and then put this in. So just hold on. Perfect. So we have about another 10 minutes or so. Is that okay, David?
That's great.
Okay. This feels really good, so thank you. So when we come back, we can have you talk about your a little bit of your own journey into journalism and how you got here, and then some tips. Is that okay?
That's great. Or I could even reverse it, and they've suffered through the first half, and we could start with the tips and get the learnings later on.
Perfect. Whatever you. So give the tips first or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just and I'll I can say I also use it as a bit of market research for things that I do. Quick back of the envelope market research for things that I'll do journalistically.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Start in 5, 4, 3. Hi everyone. Welcome back to At Sree Show. I'm Sreenivasan, and I'm talking to at DaBeard, at DaBeard, David Beard, who is the executive editor of PRI, Public Radio International. He's talking to us today from Boston. David's going to share now some of his best tips for social media, both personal use as well as kind of official business use of social.
That's right, Sree. I've got a few things in mind that work for. I'll try to do some universal tips, and then and kind of go by medium, by platform, if I could. But one bit of advice I think is good for everyone is to sort of occasionally vary your tone. If you've got something that's very important or very feels almost strident, and you've put something out there at one point, think about in the next post or two something that might be more whimsical or useful or have some aspect of discovery to it. I use different platforms differently. Facebook is a little more personal in my life. Instagram is um, I don't know, is me being a bit of an artiste. I haven't fully developed Instagram in a way, but I do like to take those routine photographs of clouds or sunsets there. So bear with me. Twitter is probably, I consider myself sort of a news wholesaler, and Twitter is much like the AP used to be, and is in some ways it to me is a way for people who love news to reach other people who love news. The same way I do. So I spend a little more of my time than I probably should on this one format, Twitter. But I do vary up. I do think of things that might be humorous. I learned from Patrick LaForge, who runs the presentation desks at the New York Times, that he used to have on his bio stuff that crosses my desk that I find interesting. And I think that's about as good a definition as anything that might pass my way. I don't, or things that the people I follow, I could amplify their message that I find is very good too. So it's not me spouting, it's me listening and molding and really trying to be a good sort of exchanger of ways with links in many cases, most cases that could enrich your life.
That's a great way of looking at it. I think one of the things I hope everyone caught was that you have a kind of strategy for social, and that's important. Uh, what are things that people are doing wrong on, say, Twitter that you wish they could fix?
Um, I don't I hate the sort of in joke. I'll occasionally do something, but I always think on two levels. Much like, let's say, you're writing a review of a musical event or of a restaurant or something. You want to have things in there for the foodie or the real rock insider or jazz insider, but you realize that 80% of your audience is this is more of a Twitter thing. Maybe on Facebook you've got exactly the audience that you want, but on Twitter, 80% may not get all the nuances of what you're saying. So if you're going to do like 12 inside joke posts in a row, that may please you, but that may puzzle a great majority of your readers. And if you're wasting their time, if you're being overly self-indulgent for your private jokes among 5 or 6 of your followers, as opposed to 800 or 700 that you have in general, you're wasting other people's times. I know it's a stream that falls and people don't spot it all the time, but I always try to be respectful. And one of the things I've learned in the past decade in doing digital work is that daily dose of humility. You think you know more than you know. It's the opposite of what Dr. Spock used to say about baby and child care, that you know more than you think you know. Many times you're caught because you're trying to. I try to be as genuine as I can and try to be as humble or offer, this is my hypothesis or this is just one point here, and not be a proclaimer, because I'm not. I'm just another voice that albeit one that reads inveterately.
So you're saying, I guess if we're turning this into a tweet, it would be
Mm-hmm.
display a daily dose of humility. Does that make
Right.
sense? On your own feed, is that what you're saying?
Yes. If I and this happens maybe once a month or once every 3 weeks, if I have a wrong link, I'll make sure that I'll put correct link on my next post of it, so that people will know that I fixed it. and I'll thank somebody who brought it to my attention very publicly as well. Or if something has changed, I'll say update. This is more. Here's another view on this, or here's something else. So it's I try to I try not to have that sort of voice of God thunder.
I like that. In terms of radio, we I was sort of hinting at this that I think we're in a golden age of radio
I
again.
totally agree.
Uh, why is radio so effective? Why are podcasts so effective? Why is CBS, for example, doing these podcasts? And it can't all be just because of Serial, or can it?
No, but there is something there. It could be a lot of small bets on the next serial, but more likely it's a couple small bets on things that can become a little bigger and can form a portfolio and can form related, attract a reader, a listener of this can be a listener of that. I think there's an authenticity, a spontaneity to radio that I hear every day. I sit in a newsroom and production facility for the world, and we can hear what we call the billboard or headline at the top of a show. There's a few quotes that you know immediately. That's great. That should be a promo to get people going farther into the broadcast. With podcasts or even the radio show or even digital print versions. My task is to make this wonderful thing not seem like such a passive thing all the time, and so put smaller clips, sometimes audio clips, into articles. We might have an article about a drought in sub-Saharan Africa in one country, and I might say, "Wow, did I just hear 3 seconds of rain falling on that country?" And they said, somebody would say yes, and I go, "How much net sound do we have for that?" And they said about 18, 19 seconds. And so in between paragraphs on our story, we might just have a link to a SoundCloud that might say, "Hear the rain fall on Burundi." And we did that on one story, and that was the biggest thing that anybody had clicked on that page. It
Mm-hmm.
was it was it was a search for authenticity. Really, people can read. I actually think a lot of our stories have audio in it. It's not hugely popular, but it lets it. So if it's a written story, it also has that interview, so you can hear. People don't want to just read. I told Dad not to go on the lake that day. The weather report was bad. They want to hear that catch in the voice. I told Dad not to go out on the lake that day. The weather report was bad. They want that gasp, that break, that pop that makes them think this is just happening, and that person, it isn't so well considered that somebody tried to cover up their tracks or shine it.
Wow, that is a great tutorial for all of us trying to understand one aspect of the media world. As we wrap up here, Dave, it would be great for folks to kind of hear a little bit of your own story and how you have come so far and done so well in journalism.
Oh, I think that journalism is, I mean, it may be as much maybe that I've just enjoyed it so much that I haven't done the appropriate bit of casting about. But it's been a great chance to be everything from the intern who worked in an ice cream truck one day and gave out cones to people, where you can almost play at learning very quickly various specific things about life. I've been branded an expert on airline crashes or Latin American baseball players or search engine optimization throughout my life, and for a person with inveterate curiosity, it's the best drug I know.
And you had earlier mentioned a couple of the places you admire in terms of digital stuff. You had said Global Post. You had said also Christian Science Monitor that are doing interesting things. And you yourself are in Boston. What's with Boston? And great stuff coming
Right.
from there.
Well, Boston is like I worked here for earlier in my career for about 12 years at the Boston Globe as an assistant managing editor, as somebody who ran was an assistant foreign editor and ran at another stage a lot of their sort of suburban and neighborhood supplements. So really getting down and attending weekly meetings with different readers in different places throughout the community, and really came to love the community, the town. And I taught at Harvard Extension School for about a decade, and I love a place where, as long as you're engaged and as long as you're curious about the world around you, there's no age prejudice. You could be 20 or 80, and the fact that you are engaged and you care about the world gives you currency in a way that in other cities might come from a nice apartment or closeness to power.
All right. Well, calling in as we are from New York City, we have our own thoughts about Boston, but it's great to kind of think of Boston and all the great work that the media is doing there as well. David, thank you so much for your time. People can find you online at the Beard. Any other links or anything you want to give us?
Yes, I would suggest take a look at pri.org. That's pri.org, and you can see the different ways that we look at stories around the world. Sometimes humorous, sometimes very serious, but I try to make it as informally told as possible.
And a whole lot of authenticity. Thank you, Dave. And I think that authenticity comes across in this conversation as well. Please check out David at The Beard and check out PRI, Public Radio International. And we look forward to following your work, Dave.
Thank you, Sree. And you've been a great mentor to me as well. Thank you.
That's very, very, I'm honored that you would say that. Let's remind everyone that you can check out our archives with new shows every Friday on our Play It archives and the @Sree archives. And please send me email with your feedback, sree@sree.net, SREE @SREE.net. And my Twitter handle, of course, is @Sree. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you again on the @Sree show. Clear. All right. Thank you so much.
Sree, thank you. I really appreciate it. And,
when you're coming to New York.
And getting an extrovert like me talking makes me think